It's a sharp line, not because it mocks belief, but because it cuts straight to the core. Belief alone doesn't mean something is true, and yet so much of religion is structured around belief, treated like a virtue on its own, something to be celebrated regardless of the content or the consequences. But is religion a scam? That's the question, and it's a heavy one. It doesn't mean asking whether everyone who's religious is being duped, or whether every priest, imam, or guru is running some kind of con. It's asking something deeper, about the structure, the incentives, the mechanisms, about how religion operates, not just what it claims. When we talk about scams, we're usually talking about systems built on persuasion, repetition, and trust, usually misplaced trust. Religion often checks all of those boxes, not always in obvious ways, but in ways that add up over time. Start with the basic setup. From the earliest ages, children are told that there is a supernatural being who watches them, who knows their thoughts, and who has a plan for them. That alone is a powerful narrative, not just because it's comforting, but because it establishes a kind of permanent surveillance, one that doesn't need cameras or police. This divine presence, we're told, loves us unconditionally, but only if we follow certain rules, if we question too much, if we disobey, if we walk away. Punishment awaits, often eternal punishment. That's not a relationship. That's coercion dressed up as love. When we call something a scam, we usually mean there's a bait and switch. You're promised one thing, you get another. With religion, people are promised clarity, peace, forgiveness, community, purpose. What they often get is fear, guilt, confusion, pressure to conform, and a deep discomfort with uncertainty. But maybe the most overlooked thing is this: if religion were a product, if it were sold on a shelf, would it pass even the most basic test for truth in advertising? The claims are enormous, the burden of proof is absent, and any doubt is labeled as weakness, pride, or even sin. The power of religion doesn't come from evidence. It comes from repetition, ritual, emotion, and social pressure. These are the same tools used in cults, in propaganda, in multi-level marketing schemes. There's a reason so many religious traditions start with children. The earlier the ideas are introduced, the harder they are to unlearn. And that's not an accident. Most adults don't suddenly adopt a faith after hearing about it once. It usually comes through immersion, habit, and an environment where belief is the norm. That's not how we approach anything else we take seriously. You don't decide which medication works by asking how many people believe in it. You don't invest your life savings based on how something makes you feel. But with religion, emotion is the whole engine. And it works. It works incredibly well. Billions of people, generation after generation, follow stories they've never seen evidence for, repeat rituals they don't fully understand, and give money, sometimes large sums, to institutions that promise them salvation later in exchange for obedience now. That's a powerful business model. One of the biggest clues that something's a scam is when questioning it becomes taboo. In many religions, asking the wrong questions can make you an outsider, or worse. In some places, it can cost you your family, your safety, your freedom. There's a built-in defense mechanism. If your doubts get too strong, you're told it's your fault. You didn't have enough faith. You weren't humble enough. You let the devil in. That's not truth-seeking. That's control. And control is the key word. Most religions claim they're about freeing the soul, or bringing peace, or offering eternal life. But in practice, they often exist to control behavior, sexual behavior, family dynamics, diet, dress, thought. You might be told you're free to choose, but only if you choose what they've already decided is correct. In a real scam, the victim gives something: money, time, trust, and gets very little in return, or something completely different from what was promised. With religion, the payout is always delayed. It's always just beyond the horizon, after death, after enough devotion, after you've let go of doubt. And if the reward never comes, the system never takes responsibility. It was you. You didn't pray enough. You didn't believe enough. You didn't try hard enough. That's the brilliance of the model. It's unfalsifiable. No matter how many promises are broken, no matter how much pain is inflicted, the belief stays intact because the goalposts are always moving. And the people selling it? They're often sincere. That's part of what makes this so complicated. Not every priest is a con artist, not every believer is gullible. But sincerity doesn't make something true. People can be wrong, deeply wrong, and still be completely convinced. A scam doesn't need a villain in a back room pulling strings. It just needs a system where power flows one way, questions are discouraged, and doubt is punished. Religion fits that description more often than people are comfortable admitting. The psychological tools it uses, fear of hell, desire for meaning, the comfort of community, are powerful precisely because they tap into real human needs. But exploiting those needs doesn't make something noble, it makes it effective. And effectiveness is not morality. Some people argue that religion is simply a cultural tradition, a way of connecting to the past, expressing values, or building community. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. But if we strip away the metaphysical claims, the threats of eternal punishment, the dogmas and rituals, what's left isn't really religion anymore. It's just social bonding. And we don't need supernatural beliefs for that. Community can exist without telling people they're born broken. Morality doesn't require divine surveillance. Meaning doesn't have to come from a script written centuries ago by people who thought disease was caused by demons. And yet, the idea persists that religion is essential, that without it people will fall into chaos or despair, that it's the only thing standing between us and moral collapse. That belief isn't just wrong, it's backwards. Study after study shows that some of the least religious countries in the world, places like Sweden, Norway, Japan, the Netherlands, also have low crime rates, high levels of education, strong healthcare systems, and more trust in institutions. Religion isn't what holds these societies together. It's often what they outgrew. Meanwhile, many highly religious countries struggle with corruption, inequality, violence, and poor access to education and healthcare. Not because belief itself causes those problems, but because religion is often used as a tool to protect existing power, to resist progress, and to silence dissent. It's not just a coincidence that the same institutions that demand obedience from believers often oppose women's rights, LGBTQ rights, science education, and free expression. Why? Because control thrives in ignorance. It needs people to stop asking questions. It needs them to trust the leaders more than their own judgment. A religion that could survive open scrutiny wouldn't need to threaten people who leave. It wouldn't need blasphemy laws. It wouldn't need to insulate itself from evidence or wrap its ideas in sacred language no one's allowed to challenge. But the pattern is consistent. Doubt is punished, certainty is rewarded, and the institutions stay in power. Think about how many religions claim to have the ultimate truth, and yet they all contradict each other. They can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. Each one insists it has the real path, the true book, the final prophet, the correct rituals, and each one has its own explanations for why the others got it wrong. If someone tried to sell you a product with that level of internal contradiction, you'd walk away laughing. But religion isn't sold like a normal product. It's wrapped in identity, in family, in fear. You're not just leaving a belief if you walk away. You're leaving a whole network of relationships, expectations, and sometimes even your safety. That's part of what keeps the machine running, not logic, not evidence, but the weight of what's at stake. And yet people do walk away, quietly, slowly, or sometimes all at once. And often they do it not because they stopped needing meaning, but because they realized the meaning they were given was too shallow, too rigid, too artificial. They realized that morality isn't handed down from above. It's built from empathy, from lived experience, from understanding consequences. That guilt doesn't make us better, it makes us controllable. That fear of punishment isn't the same thing as love of good. Religion often teaches that we're flawed at the core, broken, fallen, sinful, that without divine intervention we're nothing. But that's not humility. That's psychological manipulation. It's the same tactic used by abusive systems. Break someone's confidence, then present yourself as the only way they can be whole again. And it works. It keeps people loyal, grateful, dependent. But here's the thing. We don't need to be saved from ourselves. We need to understand ourselves. And religion doesn't help with that, it gets in the way. It teaches people to distrust their instincts, to fear their curiosity, to see suffering as a test or a punishment instead of a problem to be solved. A scam doesn't always look like a scam. It can look like comfort, like tradition, like family. It can come wrapped in music and stained glass and familiar rituals. But at its heart, it always has the same structure. Give something of yourself, your time, your money, your autonomy, in exchange for something you're promised but never allowed to verify. The reward is always out of reach, and the blame when it doesn't arrive is always yours. What makes this especially tricky is that religion can do good things. It can feed the hungry, offer shelter, build hospitals, foster generosity, but so can secular organizations. Without the metaphysical baggage, the good doesn't depend on the belief, it depends on the people. And when people start to realize that, when they begin to separate the human value from the supernatural claims, the spell starts to break. But that spell is strong. It's been refined over thousands of years, language, symbols, rituals, all crafted to bypass the critical mind and go straight to the emotional core. That's not an accident. It's how you build a system that persists even when its claims no longer hold up. A religion that has to threaten you with eternal torture to keep you in line isn't about truth. A God who needs praise or he'll damn you isn't a loving father. He's a narcissist. But say that out loud and suddenly you're the problem, not the logic, not the doctrine, you. That's how the scam protects itself. It makes doubt seem like failure. It wraps submission in virtue. It rewards those who comply and shuns those who think too much. It's not just a belief system, it's a behavior system, a way of shaping minds from birth, a way of keeping people in place. The idea that questioning religion is dangerous, that it leads to emptiness or moral decay, is itself one of the most effective tactics the system uses to survive. Because if people start to trust their own judgment, if they start to look at the world through evidence and reason instead of obedience, then the whole structure starts to weaken. And that's the real threat to religious institutions. Not violence, not rebellion, just thinking clearly. You're told the answers are already given, written down, settled, but look closely and those answers often don't answer anything. They just push the questions into a mystical fog. Why does suffering exist? God has a plan. Why did this happen? It's a test. Why is this rule in place? We can't question God's wisdom. And that works, not because it's satisfying, but because it cuts the conversation short. It gives people an off-ramp from the discomfort of not knowing. But living honestly sometimes means sitting with uncertainty. It means accepting that we don't always have answers, and not rushing to fill the silence with ancient stories just to feel safe. The discomfort of not knowing is better than the illusion of knowing. But religion flips that around. It turns unearned certainty into a virtue, and it turns humility, real humility, into a threat. A system like that doesn't grow by proving itself true. It grows by punishing doubt, rewarding conformity, and controlling the flow of information. It relies on repetition, isolation, guilt, and fear. The same psychological levers used by every authoritarian system in history. Look at the architecture of belief. You're told there's one true path. Everyone else is lost. You're told the sacred texts are perfect, even when they contradict themselves. You're told the leaders speak on behalf of God, even when they make mistakes, or lie, or abuse their power. And when those abuses come to light, as they so often do, the system protects itself. Think of how many religious institutions have covered up crimes, silenced victims, and moved predators instead of confronting them. Not just once, over and over. And yet, the institution survives, because the brand is stronger than the evidence. When someone starts to see through all of this, the first reaction isn't always anger, it's often grief. Grief over wasted time, over lost trust, over realizing you were taught to ignore your own instincts. That's not just painful, it's destabilizing. And that's why so many people stay in religion long after they stop believing, because the cost of leaving feels higher than the cost of staying quiet. But that silence has a price. It keeps the scam going. It hands the same package of fear and shame to the next generation. It teaches kids that obedience is more important than understanding, that questioning is dangerous, that authority is sacred. And all of that has ripple effects on education, on politics, on relationships. When enough people are trained to value belief over evidence, faith over reason, submission over autonomy, it creates a culture where bad ideas can't be challenged, where harmful traditions can't be changed, where progress is always suspect. Religion claims to offer moral guidance, but in practice, it often teaches moral shortcuts. Instead of thinking deeply about what's right and wrong, you're given a list. You're told what to wear, what to eat, who to love, what to think. And you're told that following the list is what makes you good. That's not morality, that's obedience. And obedience isn't always harmless. Some of the worst atrocities in history have been justified through religion, not just by fringe cults, but by mainstream faiths. Wars, slavery, genocide, torture, repression of women and minorities, all done in the name of some higher truth. You'll hear people say, that's not real religion. But that's the problem. There is no official standard, no central authority that gets to say what's legitimate and what's not. Every group claims divine authority. Every group insists they are the ones who got it right. And none of them can prove it. If someone approached you on the street and said, give me 10% of your income, follow these rules, and after you die you'll be rewarded, you'd laugh. But put that same pitch in a church or mosque or temple, and suddenly it's sacred. The absurdity is hidden by tradition, by architecture, by language, by the sheer weight of repetition, but the core is the same. A promise you can't verify, a threat you can't test, a system that gains when you submit and loses when you think. And through all of this, you'll hear defenders say, but religion gives people hope. That's true, it does. So do horoscopes. So do conspiracy theories. So do slot machines. Hope alone doesn't make something good or true. In fact, that's how many scams work. They give people something to hope for, then take something in return. It doesn't have to be money. It can be time, autonomy, emotional energy, a life spent chasing after a reward that only comes after death, and only if you obey all the rules. A scam doesn't have to be illegal to be harmful. It doesn't need a villain twirling a mustache. It just needs a structure that takes more than it gives, that thrives on imbalance, and that keeps people from seeing clearly. Religion often does all of that, wrapped in beauty, music, and ritual, but still built on fear, guilt, and submission. If someone asked you to believe something, not just casually, but to build your whole life around it, you'd want to know it was true, not just felt true, not just widely accepted. You'd want reasons, evidence, something more than ancient stories, charismatic leaders, or the sheer force of tradition. But religion doesn't offer that. It offers confidence in place of clarity, certainty in place of understanding. It teaches that the answer is already written, and your job is to fit yourself into it, no matter how poorly it fits. If the belief makes you uncomfortable, pray harder. If the rule doesn't make sense, trust more. If the authority fails you, forgive and forget. The system absorbs criticism by deflecting it back onto the individual. You didn't lose faith because the doctrine failed you. You lost faith because you failed the doctrine. That's gaslighting. It's psychological warfare dressed up as devotion. And still, people cling to it. Not because they're weak or foolish, but because they're human. Because they've been raised in it, because it's everywhere, because questioning it comes with real costs. But when people do question it, honestly, patiently, fearlessly, what they often find isn't despair, it's relief. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because the fog starts to clear, because they no longer have to force themselves to believe what they can't honestly defend. They don't need someone to tell them what their life means. They get to decide that for themselves. That's the real alternative to religion. Not cynicism, not nihilism, but autonomy, intellectual honesty. A life that's grounded in the world we actually live in, not in stories we've inherited without consent. There are people who say that without religion, we lose our moral compass, but they're confusing control with ethics. Morality isn't about obeying authority. It's about understanding harm, fairness, empathy, consequences. And we're capable of that without appeals to invisible beings or sacred texts. In fact, we're better at it when we're not trying to make our values line up with outdated commandments, when we're not ignoring reality to protect a belief, when we're not pretending that ancient rules apply unchanged to modern problems. Some people hear all this and think it's an attack on belief, but it's not. It's a defense of clarity, of self-respect, of the idea that truth matters and that we're allowed to ask for it. If a system can't withstand scrutiny, it doesn't deserve our loyalty. If it punishes you for asking questions, it's not there to help you, it's there to use you. And if it only offers comfort by demanding you ignore your doubts, then maybe that comfort was never worth the cost. Religion isn't always a scam in the way we usually think about scams. It's not always calculated or malicious or run by people who know it's false. That's what makes it so hard to talk about. So tangled, so persistent. But structurally, it functions like a scam. It promises more than it delivers. It uses fear and guilt to maintain control. It discourages open inquiry. It thrives on emotional vulnerability. And it stays alive by convincing people they'd be lost without it. The truth is, we're not lost, we're just not finished, and we never will be. That's what makes life real. It's uncertain, messy, unscripted. But that's also what makes it worth living, because it's ours. Not handed down, not pre-approved, not conditional on belief. Just ours. And that, maybe more than anything, is what religion was never built to handle. A human being who no longer needs to be told what to believe, because they finally trust themselves to find out